looked at it, it's just like the whole guy deeper and deeper. And there was just more red flags and more red flags and more red flags. It was really sad to see. I'm Kris, the helpful pharmacist. I am a biochemist and a pharmacist, and today we're going to talk about health and explain things to you in a way that you can make some actionable changes in your life. So let's get going. A family friend came to me to talk about supplements, and in this case, it was their son. He's about 22 years old, and he just basically had a mental health breakdown. And unfortunately, they think it was due to his supplements. He is a bodybuilder and was taking a bunch of supplements. I wasn't able to get all the names of the products specifically, but our theory here is that they may have actually been tainted supplements, and that may have caused him to have this reaction. So again, we talked about before, if you're not taking third-party supplements, you're taking a huge risk with your health. And after speaking with him about their son, we have this working theory that he was taking a supplement that caused this reaction because there really wasn't anything else in his life or that he was experiencing or taking on to explain this. And now he basically has to put everything in his life on hold, take multiple steps back, and kind of go through this health crisis journey. And so my big advice to them, again, besides the fact that these supplements may have caused it, was helping them understand, what's going on with that and how to help him. But I think it's just a great example of there's all these supplement companies out there, and they're not all the same, and not all the products are the same. And just because someone has a great marketing flyer, great marketing message, it doesn't really mean anything. There are some more concrete and scientific ways to look at this, as we've talked about before, which again is these third-party supplements, third-party certifications. And so I also want to start off every week with something that happened in my life. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about. It really reinforces and validates this concept that if you're not taking certified supplements, nothing else really matters, because you could get a bad batch, have a reaction, have to put your whole life, all your training on hold, and basically take multiple steps back and potentially never recover from it. So I just wanted to share that anecdote here before we get going on some other topics we have for today. There's a lot of data out there from various parties. Again, supplements is this huge industry. There's something like 20,000 brands and a couple 100,000 products, and you can't study all of them. That's part of the problem, is that there is no way for the government to get involved here in terms of every product, and it really comes down to the individual company, their ethics, their morality, their commitment to quality, and again, third-party certifications. And so there was an article that I had found last week that this one periodical review had done an assessment, and all 140 of the products that they tested in that group were found to be contaminated. I believe in this case, it was actually bacterial or fungal. So there was something in the manufacturing process that wasn't cleaned properly, and it basically promoted bacterial fungal growth, and all 140 of those supplements were tested as positive. I think this is a bit of an extreme case. It's not something I would be telling everybody, but I think it emphasizes this point, is that you cannot trust these companies. These businesses are not there to directly help you. In fact, a lot of times they're there to take your money because they understand that people are desperate, people want change, they want a better life, and they're not educated to understand the nuances of these products, and they're using that against you. And so that's really where these third-party certifications come into play, is they're neutral, they're third-party, they have their own standards on reputation to uphold. And when you get those third-party certifications involved, that's where that quality and peace of mind comes into play. So I think that, again, is always with all these examples, the lesson, it always comes back to the same thing. That's why I'm always talking about it, is that third-party certification is almost the entire story, because without that, you really have nothing. There was another example that came out this week. There was an adaptogen product that was marketed for weight loss, and they found 3 separate pharmaceuticals in it. So here they are trying to sell you adaptogens for weight loss, which really is what adaptogens are directly used for anyways. And they're actually using 3 separate pharmaceuticals in that product. Now, whether or not that was their intention or by accident, we're not going to know for sure. That probably will never be released or come out. But again, it emphasizes this point that every week, every month, we're always having these examples of tainted products. Tainted products, tainted products, tainted products. It's not a rare event. It's almost the norm. I would almost wager that more companies than not are going to experience this on a regular basis. And again, the only way as a consumer to protect yourself from this is third-party certifications, especially ones that test on a lot-by-lot basis, which again is what we're all educating patients on. At our online store, that's our main goal, is to only sell these certified supplements. That's the most important layer, and it really helps simplify that process and gives you the peace of mind, and it prevents bad things from happening. Because like we said in these examples, there are people out there who are actually getting harmed, not from the supplement itself, but from what else is being added in, either directly or indirectly. And I think it's really important for people to realize that there's a lot that goes into this process. It's not as simple as just taking vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin C, whatever it is, because if that manufacturer is cutting a corner and putting something else intentionally or indirectly into it, all of a sudden you're taking all these other things, which who knows what they are and what they're going to do. Oftentimes pharmaceuticals elicit a faster or more great effect. And when we look at the common studies of tainted supplements, which again, I think this is a small section of the tainted supplements because you can't understand all of them, it typically falls under weight loss and men's health. And when I say men's health, I typically mean ED or erectile dysfunction. So for example, there are pharmaceuticals that are very effective at treating ED and very effective at treating weight loss, but they require a prescription. So these companies do, in order to make their products work faster or work better, is they secretly put in this pharmaceutical with this known benefit into it. And all of a sudden, this semi-unknown or known herb, which may or may not work or elicit an effect, works immediately. And so they can begin to say, oh, our version's better, our formulation's better. But in reality, they're just cheating and putting a pharmaceutical in there to elicit that effect. So I think another common issue here is that there's often multiple ways to get the same ingredient in the same product. So oftentimes pharmaceutical companies will study nature, extract information from nature, and then make it synthetically and make a product like ephedra. And then when it gets banned or when it can't be used in all the situations, they'll actually go back to the plant and incorporate the plant. So I think that's a common example here was they basically realized that stimulants were popular, but stimulants were pharmaceuticals. And so what they did is they reverse engineered the research and said, well, we can't sell the pharmaceutical, we can sell the plant. So let's just pull that ingredient out of it and use that in a product. And we can claim it's all natural, it's not pharmaceutical, it's not regulated, it's a way for them to go around it. But then what happens is they use a large-scale manufacturing facility, which typically results in them using subpar precursors or ingredients. And oftentimes those ingredients are processed improperly. So sometimes what happens is they use the wrong part of the plant and an ingredient that may be toxic actually gets incorporated into the product, or the concentration of that ingredient gets incorporated into the product. At the same time, for things like weight loss and attention, more is almost always better from a what's good for you now and today standpoint. So if they double or triple or quadruple the amount of stimulant in there, you're going to gain more focus, more attention, and lose more weight more rapidly. So they're also not looking at the long-term consequences of what they're doing. At the same time, stimulants are the very popular ones because you're going to feel them immediately. And what they don't realize, again, is that if you overstimulate the mind or the body, bad things are going to happen. It's a very easy way to cause a psychosis, a mental health issue, or cardiovascular function issues. It's definitely a calculated response for some of these companies, that's for sure. They very much know what they're doing, in my opinion. This is not entirely by accident. And again, because the manufacturing process isn't that transparent, it's very easy for them to claim no fault or no responsibility. Most of these companies are using a third-party manufacturer. So all I have to do is say, well, we didn't manufacture. It's not our responsibility. We were told we were going to get X, Y, Z. It's not our fault they put W in there. So that really allows them to immediately kind of go out of their way and say it's not their fault. There was a law in 1994 that resulted in that. And there's virtually no regulation on supplements in the United States, which again is why all these things can happen.